Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the InnerFight podcast. My name is Marcus Smith, and today I have a topic which I think is topical for everybody. Modern journalism. You might not think you're a writer, but you are a consumer, and whether you remember newspapers or not, or whether you still hunt one out, buy it, read it from cover to cover, and then recycle the paper into fish and chip wrapper, we'll save for another time. Or maybe you consume all of your news and all of your content through different platforms, through social media. Maybe you're addicted to it. Maybe it's an addiction you're trying to give up. We tackle those things and a whole load of other things in, perhaps you've seen already, quite a long show today, but listen right to the end because, and this is not to make you listen. If you really want to get to the end, just skip to the end and listen to the last bit. It's very, very good. This week's show announcements. Yes, it is spring break, and therefore our kids program will also be having a spring break. Next week is the last full week until the 31st of March. There will be classes. However, the following week, there is no classes. There's no classes from Monday, the 1st of April to Saturday, the 13th of April. Bring your kids next week. Do not bring your kids the following week. 1st of April to the 14th of April, or to the 13th of April, there is no kids program. There is an extra special treat for you and also for your children. This coming Tuesday at track, bring your kids to track. We will take care of them. Don't worry. You can still get your session done, or you can just bring your kids if you want. 5:59 a.m., Sports City Track on Tuesday. We are hosting Bring Your Kids to Track Day. This could go a number of different ways. Hopefully everyone will have fun and no one will get hurt. That's my promise. Well, I'll try and uphold it. Keeping it endurance, next weekend is Milan Marathon. The 7th of April, lots of Ladies Run Club, lots of InnerFight endurance athletes are over in Milan and joined by our franchise partner, InnerFight Endurance New Zealand. InnerFight Endurance Ireland. New Zealand guys are not making this trip. Ireland will be over there with us as well. It's going to be awesome. If you're just hanging around or in Europe next week or the weekend of 6th and 7th of April, come watch the marathon, maybe even just start running the marathon if you want. Give some support. We're looking forward to it. It's going to be awesome. The following week here in Dubai, and this is a little bit for your calendar, I will repeat this next week, don't worry. The following week here in Dubai from around the 10th will be Eid. Don't worry, the gym will be open all over Eid. There'll be opportunities to work out every single day. We will have a slightly restricted timetable as we do during public holidays, but for those that have asked, there is no full closure during Eid. We will still be open. And keeping it on the theme of Eid/Ramadan, the Ramadan challenge is still going on. Many people have done 2, 3, some people have even done 4 of the workouts. And those that have been really keen and done the 4 actually asked for some more. So we've released 2 more Ramadan challenge workouts. You can do these wherever you are around the world. Hop over to our social media. Also on our website, you have the workouts. You can do them. You just need a partner, or you can actually do them on your own if you want to suffer a bit more for longer or just work a little bit harder for a little bit longer. However, they are designed as partner workouts. Let us know if you do them. We'd love to hear from you. There are a lot of people here doing it, and there are 2 extra bonus ones. So you have just over a week. They need to be done by the end of Eid. So basically 2 weeks to finish the Ramadan challenge workouts. Congrats to everyone who's done the 4 so far. Do the extra 2 for extra bonus points, and everything in the world will be great. We also have, for the last 2 to 3 months, been having a special treat in the cafe pretty much every day with our baked goods. There's all sorts of stuff. There's cookies, there's banana bread, there's flapjacks, there's the old, and probably, have to say, my favorite, the blondie, all available at the cafe. Now, those of you that have been and enjoyed those, that's one thing. Those of you that want to enjoy those on a completely different level or treat your friends, colleagues to it, we are now doing bulk orders where you can order half a dozen or a dozen and you can have them delivered, picked up, whatever. Friends, office colleagues, family, celebratory times, Eid, no matter what it is, we will prepare. And it could be a mix as well. It could be cookies mixed with blondies, whatever it needs to be. And of course, because it's bulk orders, there is a bulk pricing strategy. Give the guys, Smith Street Paleo, Instagram a shout. That will be the best place, or even just come and chat to us in the cafe if you want to treat yourself and those that you love or want to love or just want to get on side with something super tasty. My disclaimer is I probably have at least one a day, or maybe 5 during the 7 days. Anyway, that's it for this week's show announcements. Let's get into the show. This is episode number 890 of the InnerFight podcast, Modern Journalism with Carlin Gerbich. Enjoy the show. Carlin, when was the last time you bought a newspaper?
Bought? My God. I don't think I've bought a newspaper in years, mate. Working on them, you get them for free, right? And then when you don't work on them and you're traveling around, you pick them up. Bought a newspaper, probably. Actually, I found it. It was the 9/11 report on September 12th.
Really?
Yeah. I found it the other day. I showed it to Jake and he went, So
what?
I said, this is how we used to get our news. This is a newspaper.
Is it? A newspaper's dead?
Look, I think we get our news in different ways, right? I think, and it's been a long time since I sat on the tube in London, but that used to be the metro. You'd pick that up all the time, right? Yeah. And the train would be littered with them, and if someone got up and left it on the seat, you'd pick it up and read it. I don't know. I mean, I think we've got the news in our hands now. Our phones can carry the news that we want. It's force-fed to us through push notifications, through email. I'd like to think that they aren't dead, because I still think that they're an amazing way to read the news, but I just can't see.
What's so good about a newspaper?
It's the visceral thing, right, of holding it and flicking through it, I think. And also I think there's an inherent trust with newspapers, because journalism was founded on the fact that, this whole idea of getting the truth to the masses. And I think you trust a newspaper more than you might trust a digital media source, because you know that it's owned by, or it's run through ethics and run through rules.
Yeah, right.
It's regulated. What you can and can't say is regulated. It's checked. Yeah. There's legal teams checking it all. So you, as a consumer, you can kind of trust what's said there.
I agree massively. The way that you've put that, like, you think of the Times or the Telegraph, they're almost pillars of British society, trusted sources of British society. It's like the BBC, because it's stood up alone for so long. Yeah. It's like, I'm reading the Times, I trust it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a newspaper and you understand that, sure, there's going to be it's going to have its own political agenda. There's, it's either right or left wing. If it's not, then, I mean, you just take it. You take it for what it's worth. It's one of your news sources. It's one of the ways you receive your news. It's part of the balance that you try to strike. So if you read the Times or the Standard or whatever it is, I mean, my trust in those comes from the fact that they have to be accurate.
Yeah. Right. But they're not.
Well, okay, so...
You see, I was setting this up.
Look, I know this. So within newspapers, you also have to understand that there are different types of news or reporting. So you have your unbiased news story, and then you have your columns, and you have your opinion pieces, and you have your reviews. Now, where that starts to stray, I guess, is what we see a lot of now, the sensationalist news, where we worry about Kate Middleton's arm in a photo, or we we were
hairy arm or
well, I mean, I think it's easy to spout a conspiracy theory, as I know it's straying from your point.
no.
It's very very easy to assume you're being lied to, and assume that there is some ulterior motive, and that, I don't know, there's something you're not being told. And while that may be true, I don't think it is to the extent of what people might think it is.
Do you think our doubt has maybe come around because of we are exposed to different news sources today, and the advent of fake news, I guess, post 2000, where there were different channels, and we're going to go on to talk a little bit about social media, but previously, and where we started was like, it's the Times, it's regulated, it's the news, it's the truth, it's the BBC, it's regulated, it's the news, this is what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bias. There's definitely a bias.
Yeah,
I think we're looking at bias in the news.
Right wing.
Oh yeah, there's two different ways. Well, there's many different ways to look at the same story. A great news story when I was involved many years ago spoke for itself. We didn't have to spin it. In fact, our sub-editors used to say, "Don't put emotive words in stories like shocking." These words that you see all the time now. I remember writing a story about 7 people. Sorry if this is a little too dark for your show,
That's
but
fine.
7 people were killed in a minibus crash, and I wrote the story in the way I thought it might be perceived. Terrible accident, shocking, this, that, and the other. My sub called me over, and he said, "You don't need to do this. You don't need to put these words in the story. People reading this will know that 7 dead people is bad enough. You don't need to channel their thinking." So, like I said, this was many years ago, and things have changed. I think that you kind of need to be told that you should be shocked about this kind of stuff. And I think it's interesting that I thought that way then, and when it was explained, it just makes sense that of course, he said, just write this straight. It's bad enough. You don't need to. You don't need to highlight that.
Is that because drama sells?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of Schadenfreude, I guess, in everyone. I don't know. I think now it's those pieces have to stand out, and I think that's if you're reading a headline with the word shock in it, then, sorry, that's clicky. If you're reading a headline with the word shock in it, then it draws your attention. So I think, I think it's just...
We're quite messed up though, aren't we? Because it's like 7 killed in tragic accident. Oh, I'll read that.
Yeah.
Shocking accident takes 7 lives. Oh, I'll read that. Like, that's what gets us... The drama seems to get us in. Whereas if it was accident on M1, they happen every day, and I'm not that interested. But these, I don't know, as a consumer, I'm of content, which we all are. I'm probably like, it was always not so much in the broadsheets, but definitely in the tabloids.
Yeah.
Like, it was a headings game.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think but in the tabloids, like the gotcha headline is a big one, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we do like the drama. We're intrigued by the hook, and that's what it is. It's a hook.
Yeah.
Whether it's 7 dead and tragic traffic shocker, or whether it's just bad crash, like whatever it happens to be. I think that it's the hook. It's what grabs your attention, and that's what traditional media, traditional newspapers, and current. It's all about grabbing and holding your attention.
You started, mate, in print in newspapers. Tell us how you got into journalism, how you got into the newspapers in the first place.
Well, do you want the long story or the short one? So, long story. I'll do this. I wasn't actually looking. I was looking for a job. I was not looking to go to university. And in 1988, so that's giving you my age, I was about to leave school, and I was looking for a job. I went for a job at a liquor store in the warehouse, driving forklifts and moving pallets of beer around, and I almost had that sewn up. And I was working in a supermarket, and 1988, a cyclone had come through the east coast of New Zealand, wiped out the bridge in our local town, and that separated the town into two. The alleyway between the supermarket and the neighbouring building was the only access to a footbridge across the river. And when we closed down the supermarket, my job was to walk through that, close it off, walk across, grab my car and drive home. So as I was locking the gate, this tall, Basil Fawlty-looking guy was coming down the alleyway. And I just about snibbed the padlock shut, and he said, "Oh," and I let him through the gate. It happened to be the editor of the local newspaper. I then spoke to my boss, who told me that it was nice that I didn't have to make him walk around, and went in for the interview and got the job. So I had then the tricky choice of a career in journalism or one on a forklift, and I just thought, even though the journalism job paid less, I'd jump into that because there might be some transferable skills later. So then I started on the local newspaper and did that for about 6 years. So we worked on everything from local government politics to court reporting to news happenings around the town, and combining that with working in the darkroom. So worked in a very, very small room in the dark for 4 or 5 hours a day, just processing images.
Wow.
I guess that's kind of how people know me here. People either know me as a writer or a photographer, but because, at the gym, I'm usually got a camera in my hand, or at events on weekends, but this photography's been part of it for that whole time.
In my mind, there's like it's almost like any profession, but the ability to write and the ability to put something in words that's interesting for the reader to read, whether it's short form in a newspaper, a magazine, books, long form in books, is an insane skill. I'm interested to sort of maybe understand, when you started, how you saw journalism.
You won't believe this, but back then I was quite a shy, retiring kind of person. And I used to hate getting on the phone to phone people. Really? I felt like I was being nosy. I felt out of place, out of depth. And again, then phones were used only when you needed to use them, right? So picking up a phone, dialing a few numbers, and talking to. So I had a school round, so I'd have to talk to principals in the region. And talking to them and just having a chat just was not the most natural thing in the world to do, because I felt as though I was imposing on their day, and I didn't really have anything to add to their day. It was more like, I think it was a little different then too, because people weren't open to that kind of discussion, so you had to get them talking, and so it was hard to start with. It really was.
What's been interesting is you've gone from driving a forklift, and suddenly it's like, call this guy and write a story.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
So and now you get briefed on everything. You get told to almost everything is written down for you, especially when you're working with other departments. Whereas then it was just the editor would say, "I want a story on this," and you'd have to go and find something. He wouldn't necessarily know what the story was, but it would be just go find something. Just find out what you can find out.
And I think that's from the conversations we've had, and I think for anyone looking at it through a logical lens, that's where you saw real work. Because now, like you said, go and cover this story, but make sure that within your story, it mentions this. It doesn't mention that. And you're almost told what to write. Whereas previously, like you say, editors, okay, a new building's opened in town, let's have a story on it. And it's kind of...
Yeah.
I mean, you're free, mate, I think.
Kind of. I don't think... I think it was... I don't think it's any easier now to do, even if it's prescribed. I just...
Yeah.
I think it was... I think access to information is a lot easier now because you can just... you can find it with a couple of clicks.
Yes.
I worked on newspapers that still had encyclopedias for reference.
Wow.
Right. The daily I worked on, so this was, Jesus Christ, I don't want to say it, but we had one computer linked to the internet, and it was dog slow. So that was a great research machine. It was easier to go and work out stuff from the encyclopedia or phone people or go to the local library. Honestly, it was that primitive. So I think you had to have a different set of skills then, and you had to have knowledge then.
Yeah.
Right. But it was at the dawn of the era where it was more important to know where to go for information than it was to know the information. So if you're like, the senior reporters knew their stuff, right? They knew local government politics and process inside out. They knew how things worked and who would be pulling the strings behind the scenes. So they could not manipulate the stories, but they could get the story. But that took knowledge, and it took a lot of hard work and legwork with people and a lot of lunches and a lot of schmoozing to get to the story. Whereas now I think access to the information is easier, but presenting it is a lot harder. And how do you make that story engaging for people?
Were you interested in writing at school?
Yeah, writing I was. News, not so much. I actually wrote a couple of travel log kind of novel kind of things at school, just making up stories about classmates and going on a trip to America and having some fun. Right, short stories, fun things. So writing as a skill, I always really enjoyed that. But making that work and making that pay was the trick. Yeah.
I think it's probably different then and now based on what we're saying. But back then, what were the characteristics of a good journalist?
You just had to be persistent and open, right? You had to be outgoing. You had to be upfront. You had to have integrity. And I'm not saying these things don't exist now. I'm just saying, what was important then. But I think that the thing that remains constant over that time is people think writing's easy until they come to do it. Right? Writing is not easy. I struggle still with some of the stuff that we do. Not necessarily because I don't know the subject, but it's finding that angle and tone of voice and making sure that across the markets that we work with, that message is understood. Often a lot of what you say is in what you don't say. A lot of you have to be ambiguous, but not to the detriment of the content. You have to be widely understood, which is difficult. So I think those things are kind of that's where I am at right now.
Yeah, there seems quite a generational difference in the characteristics of journalists, and by that I mean, obviously I've known you for a long time and worked on various different bits, and the journalists of I guess my age to your age, are very different from a 30-year-old journalist. And I always think that your skill set is a lot like, we'll sit and have a conversation, and this has happened with multiple journalists of a similar, let's say, era. We sit and have a conversation about a topic, and I'm like, is this guy actually going to write anything down? And it's like, but what you're doing, and I learned this from you from the early days, is you're just trying to understand what's happening. And then I'm always in awe that, like, we'd sit maybe half an hour, 15 minutes, 2 hours, it wouldn't matter. And then there'd be this story that would come out, and it's like, oh my God, where did we even talk about that? It's just, it's so different from, you sit with a journalist, like a young journalist these days, like a 30-year-old, and it's like, I've got 20 questions.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? And
yeah, I guess it depends on the circumstance, right? But I have been around a wee while. I've experienced a lot. Things are still slotting into place. I'm still trying to draw connections between certain things. I'm not the fastest of thinkers, but we do read a lot. Do understand that, it's funny, like the evolution of thinking and the evolution of the role mirrors other industries as well. In that, people management changes, so those things come in. It's not necessarily the journalism part of it. It's, but yeah, I mean, like, I've been around a lot, done some pretty cool things, and sometimes these stories just trigger an experience or trigger a memory that can kind of relate to that. And I've probably told many stories the same, the same way to the same people. And I hope I am not repeating myself too much. But it's, I don't really know to go with.
How do you do it then? That's my next question is, that you've got a column to fill, a page to write, and you've got someone for normally a finite time. I mean, you can call them back, but we sit down, it's like, we're going to sit down for half an hour. How do you put the whole thing together?
You just get into this rhythm, right? Like, I used to look at my notepad, and if I was interviewing someone on the phone, if I could get 3 pages of my notes, I knew I had a story, right?
Wow.
So little reporter notebook, smaller than this.
Yeah.
I knew that if I got them on the phone long enough to get three pages of notes, I had a 20 centimeter story. So if you look at newspapers, they're in columns.
Yes.
I'd have a 20 centimeter news story was a pretty good punchy story. And I don't necessarily think you think of the intro, body copy, and end while you're interviewing someone or talking to someone. But these are little mental things that go off, where you go, I've got this, I've got that. Yep. He didn't say this, but I can either work my way around it or I can ask him if we get a moment.
Yeah.
The only times it's really been tricky for me when you're on a 15-minute time schedule, say for a pop star. I used to write a music column.
Right.
And I had 15 minutes with Joe Cocker once, and we spent 10 of that just talking shit.
Yeah.
He's just amazing.
Yeah.
I love the guy. And I didn't get to talk about anything other than just horse shit. And it was fun, right? And at the end of it, I didn't make the story. I had a great story. Opposite end of the coin, I had a train crash happen in the Manawatu Gorge a few years ago. Managed to get hold of the train driver.
Wow.
Written the story. We'd written the story to say that the train had crashed, and I was working on the follow-up. We were able to find out who the train driver was, left a message on his phone. As the as I pushed the go button on my story to send it to the news desk, my chief reporter got a phone call from the driver. So he punched it through to me, got him chatting, and Dennis, I remember, he's standing next to me with a little pad going, "Did he think he was going to die?" and underlining it like this. And I was still trying to get the mechanics of what happened. Right? I said to him, what did you think? What happened? Tell me from your perspective. So I was getting all the detail, and like Dennis is still standing here. He's a lovely guy, Dennis, underlining this thing because he wanted this in his headline, right? And I said, "So it must have felt dodgy there for a minute." He goes, "Oh yeah, I thought I was going to die." And I went, "Oh really? You thought you were going to die?" It's just for Dennis's. And he just went, "Oh," like this, and then he ran off to write his headline. So yeah,
it's interesting, mate, because I get that vibe a lot as well. The sort of Joe Cocker vibe, and that's maybe your style. That you just want to understand the person. You're never in a rush. It's not stressful.
It's got to feel natural, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the tricky thing. Like,
because you've still got to, you're working. You've got to get that story.
But you've also got to get something unique, right?
Yeah.
And, at the time there was, I don't want to ask you what you've got in your wallet or, what your top 10 favorite things, or what's on your plate. Like you want to know you want to get a flavor of the guy, right?
Yes.
And Joe Cocker at the time, he'd gone through his drug issues and everything. He was clean and you don't want to drag, everyone knows that stuff, right? Everyone's read that. Now I want to know what's next for you. What's on this album? Is this your first time to New Zealand, or is this the first, get a bit more of that kind of, and then what do you do? What do you do to relax? How do you chill out? This kind of stuff that just gets a peek behind the scenes, I think, and it gives you a little bit more flavor of who the person is. Because I didn't care about the sensationalist stuff. It's all biased crap.
Yeah.
It's
clickbait, really.
And it's doing a disservice. I think it's disloyal, right? Yeah. You sit here and go, "Oh, we had a great chat, but I'm going to just crap on about your drug issues."
Yeah.
No, that's cowardly.
Do you have, go-to questions?
No.
Really?
No. I think I learned early on being prepared for an interview is good.
Yeah.
But actually, it's one of the things, when I was working magazines, you would get asked if you want to interview someone, and they'd want a list of questions. Like, I don't know what I want to talk to them about.
Really?
But it's often nice or better to just start talking. And then you can find your own path into a story.
Do you think that's super applicable to life?
I think in terms of an interview, it can be dangerous because you can be led down. Like, these guys are looking for PR for whatever reason, so they snap into PR talk, right?
Yeah.
So but in terms of just speaking to general people, yeah, it's great because people love to talk about themselves.
Mm.
And I've had to try and stop this. I try to not talk about myself because it's not about you. And I think this is another thing that came from the early days of newspapers is you had to extract yourself from the news. You're there as an impartial observer, right? But now the news is all about, here I am, there's stuff happening, with your phone, and look, but I'm the focus of your attention, but look what's going on. And that to me is absolute opposite of what we used to do.
Yeah. It's moved a lot. I mean, I was looking at some stats, and in 1995,
yep,
there were 60 million newspapers printed a day in the US. In 2022, there was only 20 million printed.
Still that many though.
Yeah, but it was a 10% decline from 2021. So in a year, it had gone down. Interestingly, enough, the amount of people also found some stats around digital news websites, and there's actually been a 10% decline in visits to digital news websites from 2020 to 2022.
Right.
So my question here is, we have, obviously with social media as well, we have a really changed and fast changing landscape of how we consume news. So what is the role, you might have some rude thoughts about this, but what is the role of the modern journalist? Because there's an argument to say that, as what you said, like, everyone has the ability to report on something with this device in their hand.
Yeah, I don't think that this is necessarily a bad way of presenting stuff that's happening, right? We've always had in the visual news snippets supplied by someone with a camcorder or stuff that shows you what happened. I think this is a valid way of talking about news, I guess. The role of the journo is still the same. It still should be the same. The thing, you still got to get the truth across, and whatever version of the truth you decide or you present. I think there's a responsibility for the journo to make sure that still comes across as unbiased, right? And we've seen it with recent news that, and I don't want to dive into this too much, but there is definitely a media slant. There's a slant to the way things are reported. And, we've seen the same situation reported two different ways. Because the thought process, to my mind, is that we need the outside world to see this how we want them to see it. So where do you find the truth, right? If there's two polar opposite ways of viewing the same thing, even if one of those is the truth, like honest, unfiltered truth, you still take this other view into account. So I think that's the trick, and that's balanced by the commercial interests of the news organization that you're working with. So if something is shocking, like 7 people die in car crash, then that kind of sells itself, right? But if it's something that you've had to hype to sell the newspaper, and in doing so have misrepresented the truth or slanted the truth to sell newspapers, then I think that's a bit rough. It's not. You must go to bed at night feeling dirty about what you've done.
I mean, there was the big sort of scandal about Facebook and ads and the American elections and manipulation, which it's wrong.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's the same thing. But is that humanity playing out, that certain humans will do things that you and I would think is unethical or immoral for their own personal and financial gain?
Well, I'll hit that a different way. It was discovered through investigative journalism, right? So had there not been some switched on people digging around, you would not know about it. So I'm glad it got found out. I'm glad there were people willing to put their lives on the line or their reputations on the line, or however you want to present that. Because it's scary. Like investigative journalism that digs at some of this big stuff. Yeah. It's scary. Like, it does not sit well with me. I couldn't do it.
Well, I mean, recently Tucker Carlson going and interviewing Putin. Like, he must have been shitting himself.
Yeah. I mean, but even taking on big business, right?
Yeah.
you know, these guys that are willing to, like, go back to the Woodward and Bernstein days of Watergate. They took on the government. They took on the president. How scary is that? Like, even if you're 100% correct, the fact is that that man was pretty powerful, right? That position is...
Yeah, but what's freedom of speech?
Well, but there were some pretty dire consequences for even putting your head above the parapet, right? To like, it's an easier life just to sit there and go, oh, this is a bit crap. We've got all this stuff here, but someone had to actually put their name on a byline, and, like, you know, I just don't know. There's a couple of guys, and one in particular here that does it extremely well, and I take my hat off to him, because it takes some balls to tackle people. So, you know, it's I'm glad it happens. I'm glad it's still there, because it'd be tempting to think that it'd be easy to squash this power of free speech kind of thing. But it's still happening, which is great.
It is. It's funny, isn't it? Because, I mean, I think the Americans are more about freedom of speech, and, you know, but every country, or most country, wants to be seen or to market itself that, yeah, except maybe a few, we allow freedom of speech, but actually, not many countries do, because of what we're saying, and it's only these journalists that are really ballsy, that are literally, like
fearless.
you just said, that they're absolutely fearless, because just by seeking out the truth and writing it or presenting it in some way, they're actually risking their life. And sadly we've seen some journalists' lives taken because of what they've written.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah. But also, you know, like, it's a tricky one, because you have to be driven in a different kind of way, like to.
That's like, what I was going to ask you.
Yeah. No, like I'm not all about the easy life, but you know, again, you know, with this job, everything you do is scrutinized, right? So whether it's reporting on a local school fate, or, you know, 7 dead in a, I'm not laughing at that, sorry, 7 dead in a car crash, your words and your work is there in the public domain. In newspapers, the retribution or the comeback was often swift too. Like, within minutes of the newspaper hitting the street, you would get phone calls. I just want to steer away from the whole Putin thing. But here's an example, right? I used to get phone calls all the time, because my byline would go on every story, on the daily. And it was often people trying to sort of just give you their side of the thing, or straighten you out a little bit or whatever. But one day, we covered a drowning. Guy was kayaking, and he got caught between a rock and a hard place, or a tree root or whatever, and it flooded the kayak. There were lots of people on hand to try and save him, but he drowned. It was awful. But one of our photographers happened to be on scene, and he shot a picture from across the river, and it showed the guy's face, right? And so I wrote the story. I actually didn't see the image. Wrote the story. It was a pretty straight news story from the police perspective. And then story hit or the newspaper hit the street, and almost immediately I got phone calls straight through to me because my name was on the story. How do you run this image? You can see the guy's face. You know, like normally you wouldn't run an image that showed the victim's face. And it just didn't stop all day. And I just let people go. Like it's a horrible story, but look, let them say what they want to you.
Yeah.
I'm just playing a role in this game right now, right? I just wrote the story. And I went, yeah, okay, thanks. And I'd feed it all back and stuff. And then at the end of the day, I'll never forget this because it still upsets me. The guy's brother phoned, and my chief reporter said to me, do you want to speak to him? And I went, yeah. Because I've always taken the view that if I've done something wrong, I'll stand up, right? So this is the most nervous I've ever been with taking a phone call. And he diffused it immediately by saying, how's your day been? And I went, probably not as rough as yours. And he said, I said, how can I help? And he said, I just want to thank you. And I went, why? And he said, I've had to explain to my dad why my brother drowned. He couldn't understand that if all the rescue services were there and there was all this help on hand, how come they couldn't save him? He said, your image showed two things. It showed that it was an impossible task, and two, that he didn't die alone. So it still hits me. Right? It's still upsetting because, fuck, I've been that side of it, right? I've had to deal with the press on the other side of a tragedy. So for this guy to phone me and kind of understand what it must have been like, I had no idea that anyone would have any sympathy for the monkey that wrote the story. And he phones me, and he had the courage to do this. Every time I think about it, it's just
it's crazy.
Phenomenal.
I think that's the third time I've heard that story, and it's
I'm sorry, but
no, mate, it's every time.
It's the only
it's
thing.
Just wild.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've not broken any government corruption stories. I've not done anything like that, right? Nothing. It's been a fairly cruisy life as a journo.
Yeah.
In terms of, there's been a couple of stories, but they've not been political intrigue or like corruption or anything. There've been some fun, good, meaty stories to get involved with.
Yes.
But there's ones like that just knock you sideways, really hit you hard, and they stay with you. But yeah, and I'm glad we did it. I'm glad in the end. And I didn't feel dirty about the image at all, because it's out of your hands, right? The choice of image is not yours to make.
It's crazy how you could have had 30 phone calls of people and their opinions.
Calling me everything.
Calling you everything.
Yeah.
And
questioning my morals.
100%. And okay, they're feeling something, and we have to respect their feelings. Yeah. But actually the guy who we'd maybe think could have every reason.
Affected the most, right?
Affected the most.
Yeah.
And his spin on it was something
totally different.
Totally different.
Totally left field. Why? Because I still wouldn't make that call if it was me. Right?
That's mental.
Because I would, and I think maybe there's this kind of view that the press is at war with people, or there's this distrust. I don't think Trump's really helped with his whole labeling of fake news, but I can kind of understand a little or a modicum of that criticism that he had of the press, because a couple of years ago, I think I've told you this story, a couple of years ago, went to see my dad. We were watching the news, and the news stories was like, you don't notice it for a start, but then when you watch a few hours of news, you notice that the stories go in this rhythm and this cycle. Here's the story. Here's why you should be outraged. Here's someone who's outraged. Here's someone that offers a counter view. Here's our summary. And they would do this, this is it, right?
Mental.
And they would do this with stories about the Florida governor at the time was going through some sort of drama. And then they would go to a cat up a tree story, and it would be the same thing. Here's a cat up a tree. Here's why you should be concerned. Here's the person concerned. Here's the firefighter who's going to squirt it or grab it here's the resolution. And it would go through this all the time. And it was just appalling. Crazy. So I can kind of understand the criticism of the press or the media. And I can also understand that it's changed. They need to sell stories, or sell newspapers or whatever, but they also need to frame this news in a way in which it's sensationalized. They're always going for the angle that may not actually portray the truth and so clearly. But it's like, it's hard to generalize because it's not a general kind of thing. It's all specific to the story and circumstance. So
it's interesting. I think one thing that sort of rung in my mind there is what we now have in the modern day, because we are so digitalized in news and everything we consume. I mean, people still do read books, and once books are published, even if digital, they don't get unpublished. But as far as news articles go, magazine articles, posts on various forms of social media, there's always a get out, which is to take it down.
Right, yeah.
In print media, that was never an option.
No.
Even if 20 people called that day and the owner of the newspaper actually in his heart thought that the article and the picture of the gentleman who was drowning was not right, there was no option to remove it. We now have an option to take news stories down. And I don't know if we're seeing it exercised more, but definitely on social media, we see it exercised a lot. What's your thoughts around that?
Okay, so if we got something wrong in the newspapers, you could print a retraction, or you could pull the story. So like in the dailies, they have multiple print runs a day. So the newspaper I worked on had two. One at our deadline, I think, was 9 a.m, and the press time was like 9:15, and then they'd have one around lunchtime. So if there was a problem with the story, we could address it with the second edition. It wouldn't often. In fact, I can't remember an instance where we killed a story, and it's called that. You kill a story, right? But it's never so wrong that it needs to be killed. It's for other reasons. It's just like things have moved on. This is no longer the case, or this circumstances have changed. So you would kill that story and replace it with another one or an update. Social media, I think, again, it's situation specific. So let's say that your social media channel is sponsored by your sponsor, and you've said something that is detrimental to that sponsor. Whether it be truthful or not, that sponsor might pull their money, right? So that's a consideration you have to make, and it's a commercial consideration, not something that is actually factually incorrect. So there's that, and the influence they may have on other people. So you've got to make that judgment. Like, things have to pay, right? And I think what we're seeing with newspapers is that declining readerships. There's various reasons for that. We've seen advertisers pull their money, so that means your pagination goes down, which means that you have less impact with the news, which means that you have to run more impactful news, which may be slanted in a different way to help sell newspapers, or it may change the way you write headlines or stories. But I don't think it's a one rule for everything.
Social media, we've brushed around it, we've mentioned it.
Yeah.
I found a stat that actually disturbed me slightly. I don't know why I was so surprised about it, but 62% of the world's population use social media. And if that stat doesn't disturb you or shock you in some way, they use it for an average of 2 hours, 23 minutes per day.
It's a lot, man. 8% of your day, maybe almost 10% of your day.
News, images, fun. Like, we know we're getting information. Yeah. Is YouTube considered social media? I don't know.
Imagine so. Yeah.
Imagine so. Yeah. It kind of fits within that bucket. If we look at the decline that we spoke about in newspapers, if we look at the decline in people's appetite to go and visit digital news sites, and we look at this huge penetration of social media, where do you think, and I ask this in two ways, mate, where is the role of the journalist in the coming sort of 5 to 10 years? That's my first question.
Wow. Okay. So that's a big one.
Yeah.
Look, you could say that like declining newspapers is a bad thing, and you could, the exciting thing for any content creator, and let's not talk about journalists in general, because I think they just form part of the mix. The journalist is a content creator now anyway, right? It just, the modern journalist has to go out and think about all forms of media, right? And whether they're actually creating a vlog or a post to support the news, or whether they're encouraged to do that or not, or whether they're going out with a crew to film something, they're still content creators. They're still thinking about this on multiple levels. So I think the modern journalist has to be more agile than ever. They have to do more than ever. The tools may have made things a lot easier, but they're still thinking on like an old telephone operator, plugging in things and ticking boxes and making sure that everything's done. It's not an easy job. Whereas we used to just think about writing, right? Let's go and talk to someone and write something and go back and write 4 paragraphs on it and put it against a photo. The job is not easy, and I don't think it's going to get any easier. But same your stat there, 60 odd percent of the
62%
is using it for more than 2.5 hours a day. That gives you the potential reach, or the audience is now global for anything you do. So it's exciting as a content creator to know that people are spending more and more time on their phones or on their laptops looking at this stuff, because at some point they'll stumble across you, or they'll stumble across your content. So where's the role of the journo? I still think there's a huge opportunity for those traditional journalism traits to thrive in this new industry, or this new kind of audience. But man, if I had a crystal ball, I'd be a rich boy.
The second part to my question is, has the tech and therefore social media, do you think and the way that we consume, be it news, content, because like you said, and I've actually never really thought about it like that. I think it's a little bit of an insult to pitch it, but it's true what you said. Like, a journalist is now just a content creator, and in my mind, I've got someone like you, insanely experienced, can deliver these amazing stories, versus these fuckwit content creators we've got lying around, and we've got them in the same field, but they're after the same attention, aren't they? They're chasing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, so I work in automotive, right?
Yeah,
we're not competing with other automotive manufacturers for the audience. We're competing with the likes of GoPro, Red Bull, whatever flavor lipstick. We're competing for attention.
Attention, yeah.
And that's the difference. Newspapers it's a captured audience, right? Once you got that newspaper in your hands, even if you're reading the comics, you got that attention because that thing is in your hand and it's blocking out the rest of the world. So grabbing someone's attention now is what it's all about.
So is tech a net good or a net bad?
Oh, it's got to be a net good because you're able to draw information from lots of different sources. Tech, it's got to be a net good. The problem is the mountain of information, right? And sifting through that information is the trick. I think ultimately you end up with a couple of reliable sources that you always go back to. But how cool is it when you discover a new whole stream of content or a whole new way of thinking or a podcast, a new band? You find this stuff through consuming content. I found, I don't know how many new bands and music through watching Instagram reels and working out what that song is and and then finding a whole new genre of stuff.
Oh mate, how much rubbish do we send to each other on a daily and a weekly basis?
Yeah. So, I think the attention span is the thing, right? If you're spending 2.5 hours or 2 point whatever it is hours on social media, what is it that you're consuming? Is it news? Is it? Your dad's of the age where he'd come home and read the newspaper in the evening, right, or in the morning, or whenever he got it.
Yeah, he's one of the guys, and we haven't spoken about this. We spoke about it before the show. He's one of the guys that subscribes to the Digital Times or Digital Telegraph, but it's so interesting because let's go back to Tucker Carlson. He read in the Times what that interview that he did with Putin was, and therefore got his news, got his information, and apparently the Times sort of said it was crap. The bottom line was it was crap. I said, have you watched it? And he said, no.
Yeah.
Because the Times is his trusted source, which is super interesting because when we lived here as kids, he would have the Telegraph. He had a subscription to the Telegraph, and he would get the Telegraph newspaper delivered, but a day late.
Yeah.
So until around the early 2000s, you could get all of the UK newspapers here, but they'd be a minimum of 1, maybe 2 days late,
right,
and they'd be 3 times the price, and they'd sell them in the supermarkets. So he went from Telegraph to the Times, and now he'll read the Times, and on his iPad, he has a subscription. He's told me how he's completely lowballed them because the Times are so desperate for subscribers. You kind of go, no, I don't want to subscribe, and then they give you 50% off.
Right. And
then you go, no, I don't want to subscribe, and then they give you another 50% off. So he's got it for like £1 every 10 years or something, right? Like that. But he then won't go to the interview on YouTube and watch it.
Yeah, so this is something you have to do as a journo, right? And this is something that I think you do as well, is that, and it comes back to that access to information, right? You can get white papers on everything. Yeah. You can find the source material. You can view these things for yourself and develop your own opinion. You don't necessarily need to go to a newspaper to have their spin put on it. Now, it's good to get balance sometimes and go, well, actually, because you might get swept up in the messaging, right? So if Putin's going, let's not use Putin, but if some guy's going on about how great his new shoes are, and you go and work out that they're made from fucking elephant testicles, and you haven't had that balance, you might go, well, these are the best thing on the face of the planet. But if you've read the white paper going, well, actually, it's endangering elephant population in Botswana, you go, oh, shit, it's not a good thing, right? So you access to information, go find this. You can find this stuff yourself. If
you're spending 2.5 hours a day on social media, you can find a lot.
You don't have to have it spoon-fed through to you, right?
Yeah.
So I think you just have to make a little bit of effort, and it's you become your own journo. You can find this stuff out.
Before we finish up, mate, I want to know 2 interviews you've had. One, the best interview, or the one that you've enjoyed the most, the best. It could be the best story. The Joe Cocker one was quite good. Could be a celebrity, couldn't be a celebrity. So one sort of story that you've worked on that you've absolutely loved, and one absolute nightmare.
There have been some good ones. I mean, there's nothing bouncing out right now. I mean, the story, not so much the interview, but the story that was the most exciting as a journo, because it felt like I was a proper journo, was one where a police officer was his house exploded, or it caught fire. It went up in a fireball one morning, and it turns out that so he was found bound with zip ties in the backyard, naked, and house burnt, and there'd been this string of letters that had been sent to the newspaper and his work, and it was about how this Satanist was targeting him for some reason. It was straight out of some British police drama. So we had New Zealand police psychologist said there was a Satanist on the loose, and so this turned down to a massive string of stories for us, and it was exciting, right? We get called to the police station. There's all this stuff. So they launched this operation, Mars or Venus, whatever. And I remember standing on the steps of the police station with a reporter from the Dominion, a guy called John someone. And he was fizzing. His first time I'd seen him, he was like he had Barocca in his shoes. Like he was just going, oh, I can't wait. He couldn't wait to get back to his office to write this story. This has everything, he says. Like the story had so much of everything that when it came to question time, there's always questions, right? It came to question time and all the journos went, no, I've got no questions. They couldn't wait to get to the office. So we're standing on the steps of the police station. I think John lit a cigarette. He just needed this couple of minutes just before he went back to the office. Said, this has everything. And I went, yeah, I know. So we went and wrote these stories. Turns out in the end that it was all fake. And then we had the fallout stories from the community that felt betrayed. And then the court stories and stuff. So I was involved throughout the whole thing. It was about 5 weeks worth of front pages.
Wow. Which
was pretty cool. So that made me feel like a real journo. I felt in the end, because we were told that there was a parallel investigation going into it. This is why I couldn't get between Mars and Venus. Which one was the investigation for the Satanist and which one was the one looking into his story? But it turns out he was having an affair with someone in the office, and she was a bit of a psycho, and his ex was a psycho. Oh, I don't want to get into it because I'll running the risk. It
sounds a bit like, isn't there a John Grisham book about he moves into a town and the main character starts working at the newspaper, and there's a load of weird, it's one of these strange American towns in the arse end of nowhere, and that he becomes the reporter, and it's almost like you said, it felt like a real journo. It's like the drama of living this investigative, I obviously can't say that word, life of a journalist that you're almost in the FBI as well as, you know, because you're...
You know, like, I was lucky to work the police round because there were some great stories.
Yeah.
And often, like, I don't want to overplay this because but whatever I say is going to sound like I'm trying to big it up. But when you're working with police on stuff, suddenly you get to see how they work, and they want to involve you in some way because they like some... This is going to overstate it, but I think sometimes when you're asking questions, it gets them to think, and they have their methods. I'm not saying that anything that we ask is going to sway that at all, but it's nice to... Sometimes it's interesting to be involved with it.
They probably also, when you're working with authorities like that, they probably also, a lot of the time, authorities are seen as authorities and not always in the best light. Whereas...
Yeah, and the people as well, right? You know, like, how would you... I mean, I know you probably get a little condition to it, but it's not... You know, it can't be great to work a murder case.
Yeah,
can't be great to walk in on a domestic violence case.
Yeah,
that's gone even worse. You know, it can't be fun. So sometimes this dark humor that I might have comes from the fact that you have to decompress in some way, right? And actually, like, having worked the police round and seen some pretty horrific things, when it comes to dealing with, you know, consumer magazines. And people getting stressed about small things, you go, look, it's not that important.
Not bad. It's
really not that hard, right? It's not life and death. Have you ever had to phone anyone and ask them how they're feeling after their kid got drowned, who was drowned at the beach?
Yeah.
Have you, like I have, have you ever seen someone skewered by a forklift because they were they stayed overnight at a farm because they'd had a few drinks, and they were doing the responsible thing and driving home early in the morning, and as they rounded a bend, they went straight into a fucking forklift. Wow. You know, or bail lift, you know, the spike.
Yeah.
They'd gone through the car and torn it back to the B pillar. Wow. Have you ever seen a burnt person, someone died behind the wheel? Like, I have.
Has it been traumatic?
Yes. It's been awful. I don't wake up in cold sweats, but there's times where I go, that's awful. But it just brings me back to that whole thing of like, what we do, if it's not that, if it's base content about some cool stuff, you know, if it's not life and death, then it's not life and death. You're like, it should be stress free. There's no need to worry about these kinds of things. But if you were asked to phone the family of someone who's recently died, you're a human as well, right? I'd like to think that. I'd like to think that every journo that does that and does the how you feeling kind of phone call feels dirty about doing it. But you have to do it. And sometimes you just pull on this mask or you pull on this persona like, this is what people expect of me or of the person phoning. But no, I don't want to ever do that again. That's awful.
But at the same time, and I think this is applicable to so many areas of life, the way that you make that phone call, and especially for you, mate, your demeanor, the tone of your voice, it can be so, same as the kayak guy, you can have such a profoundly positive impact on those people.
I mean, the idea was most of the time is to not necessarily even get anything out of the person, right? You just phone them and say, hey, look, we've heard the news. If you'd like to talk, or, you know, if you've got anything that you want to say about the person, or you'd like, you know, and often they would, it's still raw, right? Like it's, so you'd feel, I mean, you got to take yourself out of it, but you can't You just simply can't. And it'd be nice to be a cold bastard sometimes and just go, look, if you don't want to talk, that's fine. But I feel as though I have to be that way anyway.
Yeah. But you have empathy, mate.
Yeah. But, and that serves you in different ways, right? Like if you can't empathize with the person you're writing about, how are you going to have a connection at all?
We didn't have empathy as one of the traits of a journalist at the start of the show, but we have it now at the end.
Well, I mean, I think...
we had integrity.
I mean, I think that the really cool thing is that this has led to other things, right? So getting out of newspapers and moving into magazines and then into like... so with men's health, that was great because that put you in front of people like, you know, CrossFit athletes 10 years ago when CrossFit was getting big. I mean, Reebok was involved back then. So we got to go to Reebok and interview a bunch of people. Katrin, we spoke to a few of the guys as well, Patrick. So these guys are starting to, or Patrick now is, I don't know where he is in his CrossFit career, but he's gone from like down here to a real proper contender now. So, so that, you know, and that was great. I mean, I've had a couple of times where I've interviewed my heroes, like Juha Kankinen was a rally driver, finished rally driver, and I've interviewed him twice. Interviewed him once in Greece. And it was one of those out-of-body experiences. Like, I'm sitting here talking to this dude. And then I spoke to him a few years later when the head of his old boss, Ove Anderson, had died. So we'd want to do a tribute piece. And he was like a father figure to him. So it was like, it was a real emotional interview. It was great. He broke down. It was not that was but it was like, I wanted to, you know, this is important, right? And I feel honored that he wants to talk to me about it, which is really nice. Got to meet Colin McRae, right? That to me was amazing. That we get into this sort of trusted circle of journos that they trust because they understand that there's the tabloidy kind of media out there, and then there's also the people that they need to be able to trust and talk to and vent and say, if I say this is where it's coming from, and you understand why I might react badly to this, or actually Richard Burns was more like that. So, but yeah, you know, I've been fortunate.
Mate, you've been good. You've been good for the last hour or so. This has been. We could actually talk. We haven't even really touched on photography, which is a huge part of, as you said, what people probably know you here for. But mate, I want to appreciate you. It's been awesome we could keep chatting forever. Try and respect the listeners. And we're actually an hour 15.
Yeah, if I'm still with you then.
So, yeah, if you're still here, then you've definitely got some resilience.
You've got an hour less left for the rest of your social media today.
No, it's good. It's very interesting because it's I think it's a big part of all of our lives, and it's a very fast-paced. The way, I mean, with the stats that we looked at and with stories that you've shared.
Yeah, we can understand why.
Yeah.
And it's very personal, you know, the views on why things are happening and whether I like it or not. So it's a very, very personal thing. So I think, it's been good to chat. But, I hope there's something worth listening to.
I think there's a lot there, mate. I appreciate it, Carlin. Thank you so much.
Cheers.